Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Annette today. Annette's a listener that reached out to me about some things she's experienced over the years, and she's from Cottage Grove, Oregon. Welcome to the show today, Annette. How's it going?
Thanks. I'm doing good. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. I've been waiting to talk to you for quite a while. I've always, there are certain areas that, I really like to hear about. And this area of Oregon is one of my favorites. As listeners know, I have, a lot of episodes from out in this area. But Annette, I'm going to go ahead and let's pass things right over to you so you have the time to share what you've experienced over the years. And feel free to take us back to when this all started to happen for you.
Okay, well, when I was young, I was like maybe 3 going on 4 years old. We were living up in Portland, Oregon. And we were really, Portland wasn't quite as developed as it is today, obviously, because it was 1969. But we lived pretty close to downtown Portland, Oregon. And really, all the yards kind of went right off these railroad tracks, kind of uphill. So all the yards kind of descended down, and it was the summer of 1965, and all the kids and me and my older brothers and sister were playing down at this 2-story fort. And the fort was in the backyard about 2 houses down. So there was our house, and then there was another house, and then the next house had the fort that was in the backyard that sort of declined down, and then the fort was almost just right to where the railroad tracks were, but up in the yard. And then the railroad tracks kind of came down, and on the other side of the railroad tracks was just a bunch of greenways with lots of fruit trees and blackberries and, just a kind of a green swath of land. So, it was in the fall, and all the kids had returned to school, and I, being 3, kind of going on 4, because I don't remember exactly the date, but I'm born in the fall, and so I don't remember if I was 4 or 3. But anyways, my parents, we were moving out of our house, and we were moving to another house in Portland, and they had a couple friend of theirs over. And they were kind of packing stuff up, and they had explained to me that we were moving, and I knew about moving because it wasn't our first move that we'd made. Earlier in my life, we'd also moved to Portland because I'm from Eugene. So, they had explained that to me, and both the front door and the back door was open, and I decided to sneak out the back door because I really wanted to see that fort one last time, because I knew that, more than likely I would never see it again. And so I snuck out the back door, and I walked through the side yard and up to the sidewalk, and I walked down to the fort. And when I got to that backyard, I wasn't too stable on my feet at that age, so I was really just looking down at the ground, making sure that I didn't fall or trip or anything like that. And so I'm staring at the ground, and I walk up to the fort, I was walking down the yard to the fort, and I get to the base of the fort, and I look up, and I see these hair-covered beings standing at the top level of the fort. And let me explain the fort a little bit. It was an open-framed fort with 2 levels. One was down low where I was standing, and it, had poles to hold the fort up. And then there was a second level up above that was open. And then it had a ladder connecting the 2 on the back side of it. But I was looked up, and there was these hair-covered beings, and they kind of huddled together and they seemed kind of scared of me. They weren't very tall. They were taller than me, but they weren't like real large or anything like that, or an adult size. They looked somewhere between my height and an adult's height. Um, Maybe the tallest being at 5 feet or so. But so I looked up and I saw them, and they seemed to be, really scared of me. And in my mind, I'm just like, what is this? What are they? And um, then, I was thinking in my head, well, wait, they don't look like a monkey. They don't look like an ape. Mutual of Omaha, we used to watch that as a family. And, Wild Kingdom. And also, another thing was 1968, the movie Planet of the Apes had come out. And I remember thinking, wait, is that movie real? And then I thought, yeah, but they don't look at all like the characters in that movie either. And so I didn't know. And the weird part is that I experienced missing time after that. There was no other memory other than looking up at these beings. And the next thing I remember, I'm up on the sidewalk at that house in between the two houses. And I'm looking at my house, and I feel like the whole world is rushing. Like I kind of get this huge head rush, or feel like the world's kind of, I don't know, it was a really strange physical feeling. And suddenly the whole world just felt larger than life. And so I walked home, and, the front door and the back door is still open. And so I walked in the front door, and I didn't know who my parents were. But my dad, saw me, and he's like, there you are. And he comes over and he picks me up and he puts me on the fire hearth, and they rolled up the rug, our living room rug. And my mom gave me a loving smile. And I just remember being so grateful that they were my parents. And anyways, so that was that. We ended up that day moving to another house in Portland. And the weird thing about this experience is that it was so impactful for me that I never forgot about it. It Every day it came to my mind, and over like 53 years by the time I went to a hypnotherapist to try to regress to figure out what really happened. I think the memory faded. I couldn't remember how many beings there were. A couple things a couple of things. I remember that they had lighter colored skin, and I seem to have remembered sort of a reddish orange hair and a golden retriever gold colored hair. And later on, that kind of comes into play as to why I remembered that. Um, so life went on after that, and we'll kind of come back to that. But the next thing, I grew up fishing and going up fishing up in the Cascades and up at Odell Lake. My dad kept his boat up there, and as kids, we went out into the woods a lot and never saw anything. And I got into my 30s, and I was married to my first husband. And just a little background: he had a lot of problems with insomnia. And he would always fall asleep at like, 9 or 10, and then wake up at like 1 in the morning and stay up until 4 in the morning, and then would fall back asleep. But what our plans were this particular day, we'd gotten off work, and we were going to go into Eastern Oregon, but we were looking for a place just to go camping, on the way to Eastern Oregon. And I actually did that a lot in my, 30s or so. So we went up to Oakridge, and we were just looking for a place to go camping. And I think the place was Salt Creek Falls, where there's like 3 camping spots that kind of overlook these waterfalls. And I had my dog with me, but my dog was never really good with other dogs. And when we got up there, campsite, there was one that was available, but there was 2 other people that had 3 pit bulls that were off leash. And I thought my dog's gonna not get along. And my dog was a corgi, so he's smaller. And I thought I just don't need any incident like this. So I pulled out my handy map and decided to go further up towards Blair Lake. Um, so we drive on that logging road, and we just keep driving and driving. And it was like, I think 24 or 25 miles up on that logging road. And it was afternoon by the time we'd gotten at least to Salt Creek Falls, but now it's getting later. And we find this little campground that, well, I thought it was Blair Lake, but I later learned that it wasn't. It was someplace maybe close to Blair Lake, but it wasn't Blair Lake. But it was right off the logging road, and it was this little tiny kind of pond-like lake that had several campsites around it, very rudimentary. And that was fine because, we just wanted to stay the night and get up at the crack of dawn and leave again to get out to Eastern Oregon. So I was camping there, and we didn't make a fire. We just went into our tents. And one of the things that I was really concerned about was that all around the lake there was these blue huckleberry bushes, and all the huckleberries were just ripe. And I was like, oh no, because black bear like huckleberries. And I was like, shoot, I don't want a bear coming into camp. And I remember kind of looking down the logging road, and the sun was starting to set, and I'm like, geez, we can't make it back down. This isn't a safe spot to camp. And so I remember kind of having those thoughts and being concerned that way. So we didn't make a campfire, and we just went ahead and crawled into our tents and went to bed because we were going to get up at the crack of dawn to get back on the road again. And that night at about 1:40, I woke up and I had to go to the bathroom. So I kind of sit up in my sleeping bag, and I hear, so there's the logging road and where we were camping right off the logging road. So the car was really just behind me. Um, but also on the other side of the logging road was an incline up on a hill um, that was probably about 60 to 70 degrees incline going up. And so I'm sitting in my tent, and I hear coming down that incline what I thought was maybe a small herd of elk. And I've been around elk herds before, but this sounded like just a couple, two, three, four, five, I don't know, elks, right, coming off the hill. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, well, they'll kind of part and pass the tent, and then I can get out and go to the bathroom. Um, but there was sort of a hesitation at the logging road when the elk got to the logging road. And then there was just kind of a moment of silence. And then all of a sudden, three bipedal beings, heavy, heavy bipedal beings, came walking towards my tent. One went on one side of my tent, one went on the other side of my tent, and one went just kind of on the curvature of the water. And weirdly enough, I'm sitting there going, what is this? Because they started pacing from one foot to the other foot. And I mean, it's right outside of where I'm sitting up in my tent, and so, and the other one's on the other side of the tent, and they get in sync with each other on the kind of going from one foot to another. And every time they make a step, like the earth moves. That's how heavy whatever it is. And at the time, I didn't have Bigfoot in my head at all. So I'm thinking, why is there elk sitting there on 4 feet, and they're doing that with their back legs? So that's what I'm thinking it is. But I'm thinking that's really weird behavior. And anyways, this went on for, well, I don't know if I just kind of got mesmerized because I felt like I was being rocked in a cradle because they were all in sync with each other. But then about 2:20 in the morning, I'm sitting there still, and I realize, wait, they've stopped. And I'm like, I didn't hear them walk off, or I didn't hear the elk walk off. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Is something just standing outside my tent? And I'm like, and I really have to go to the bathroom. And so I'm like, there is no way I'm getting out of my tent. And so I just was like, okay, I'm just going to lay down here. And I did a little prayer to God and said, please, God, let me sleep till daylight, so I could get up and go to the bathroom. And so, sure enough, I instantly fall asleep, and morning comes. It's 5:30 and it's daylight, and I get up, and my husband wakes up and he's like, man, I've never slept so great in my whole life. And I'm like, yeah, and I never said anything to him about my waking up or anything. And I quickly wanted to pack up and get the heck out of there. And that's exactly what I did. So that was kind of that encounter. And I kind of forgot to mention before that, I might have been more in my 20s at that age. I had gone up towards Oakridge with a boyfriend of mine, and we had his parents as two golden retrievers. And we both worked that day in the morning, and we were going to go out into Eastern Oregon once again. And we stopped at this little campground, and I can't remember the name of it, but um, and I have no idea if this had to do with Bigfoot. It was just a weird experience, but um, so we'd stopped at this campground, and it had maybe 19 spots, 15 spots. I don't know. It was a really small campground. No one else was there. Highway 58 was right by it. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we thought, oh, let's take a little bit of a nap. That way we can stay up by the campfire and enjoy the campfire tonight. So we'll just take a little bit of a nap. So we took the two golden retrievers, Roxy and Charlie, and we tied them up to the picnic table because we didn't want them wandering up onto Highway 58. And so we tied them up to the picnic table with some nylon rope. And we just tied it to their collars and then tied them to the picnic tables. And that way they, could stay safe while we took a quick nap. And so we took our nap, about an hour nap, and we got up, and I couldn't believe it. We got out of the tent, and the dogs are just roaming around the campsite. And so I walk over and I look, and the nylon rope has been cut. I mean, cut like with a knife, it looks like. It's a real sharp, clean cut. And they're just wandering around waiting for us to get up. And thank God they didn't go up onto the road. But there's nobody in the campsite. And we didn't, I'm sure I would have woke up if a car had pulled in. So that was really weird. We went ahead and stayed there that night, but I remember I just kind of looked in the woods and kept thinking, is somebody watching us? Was there some person that maybe is living up in the woods that was just trying to give us a message that we weren't alone? So that was also kind of a weird time out in the woods. Um, so moving on, so it was probably about maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And I had gone up to Brice Creek, and I had just moved out here to Cottage Grove. So I wanted to go up to Brice Creek. I'd been up there before, but it's a pretty hard trail to kind of climb. It's not hard if you're in shape, but at that time I was really, really out of shape. And so, and the reason I wanted to go up there was I had this little dog that, it was a rescue dog from San Francisco, and there was a whole kind of story that went with her why she was rescued out of that city, and she was wandering around a homeless camp, and it was kind of sad. And I wanted her to see the woods, and so that was my intention to go there. So I get up to the parking lot, and so I thought, I'm just gonna walk up the creek here because I'm not gonna go over to the trailhead because that's a lot of up and down, a lot of climbing. And I thought I can just walk up the creek a little bit. And so the moment though I stepped out of the parking lot and into the creek, um, I got this horrible feeling that something was very, very angry at me, and it was towering over me. And I didn't have a weapon. I just had me and my little dog. And my dog, she is looking back behind me or kind of off to the side of me. Um, and behind me was sort of like this whole hedge of like laurel and vine maple and I don't know what else for plants. But basically it was like a hedge that was maybe like 6 or 7 feet tall, right? And I felt like something was watching me, but I couldn't see anything. But my dog is looking behind me at where I can feel something looking at me. And so I turned my back on it. And in my mind, I just said, back off from me now, because I was scared and I didn't know what else to do. And I said, back off from me. This isn't going to end well for either you or me. And I just said that in my head. And then I kind of was like, well, I started kind of talking to it and I said, listen, the only reason I'm here is, because of this dog. I want her to see how beautiful the forest is. She comes from a big city where she's only known concrete, and I wanted her to see the woods. And so I'm like, so what I did was I went ahead and I looked up to where I wanted to walk to. And I said, in my mind, I said, this is where I'm going to walk. And I, uh, I kind of shot at a picture and I said, I will turn around at this point and come back. And so I started walking, but my dog will not quit looking behind me as I'm walking. And I feel whatever this thing that's angry and mad and large is behind me. I keep kind of stealing glances, but I see nothing but that hedge, right? And the worst thing I didn't want to see was some kind of eyeballs looking out of that hedge, because that would have freaked me out. And so, but my dog keeps looking and I'm trying to distract her, and she's being really good because she is, when I distract her, she's doing kind of what I say. I grab a stick and I play with her in the water a little bit and show her the stick and kind of point to some trees with her. And she looks at those trees, but then she looks back behind me, right? And she does that. And we kind of make our way up. I have to climb over some logs and stuff. We make my way up to that point where I said I would turn back. And I kind of stretched and I looked up the creek, and it was so beautiful in the forest. And I stretched and I thought, God, I could just walk here forever. And I had this horrible bolt of dread shoot through my body. And then it was gone. That bolt of dread, it was a feeling that came through me, and then it was gone. And I thought, yeah, if I thought I was talking to I'm a person of my word. I will turn around. I won't continue. And so I turned around and I went ahead and walked back to where the parking lot started. And the weird part about that was, the whole time I felt watched. When I was playing with my dog in the water and I kind of put the stick in the water, the feeling of anger from whatever this being was, I could feel suddenly kind of like a curiosity from it a little bit. Like it was curious as to why I would like a dog. What this didn't make sense to whatever this creature was, why I would even have any regards for a dog. I kind of had that feeling, so I could feel its emotions change. But also when I got back up to the parking lot, the moment I stepped foot onto the gravel parking lot, and got both my feet onto that gravel, the feeling of being washed was totally gone and everything felt like normal. So I went from being intensely watched the whole time to suddenly there's nobody watching me and the parking lot felt fine. So I walked back to my car and left and didn't really think too much of it. And then I started, I think the first thing I kind of noticed at home was I noticed underneath my husband's truck, there was two gardener snakes that were kind of shaped into the shape of a figure eight, like infinity. And then they were pinched off and killed in the center, like they pinched the center of the eight and left that in my driveway. And I thought, oh God, that's kind of creepy and scary. And, so I never picked it up, and it just ended up kind of getting dry and kind of, that sort of thing. I don't know. It just got old and dried, and I never did anything. Um, I did start getting weird rocks showing up in the pea gravel in my backyard. Just rocks, but there were rocks that, and I'm a total rock person and I have baskets of rocks and stuff, but none of them were rocks that I had. So they were things that were being introduced into my backyard. But they were pretty rocks. I'd just pick them up and, put them in my basket or bring them in the house. It was nice. Um, and I definitely started kind of looking more into Sasquatch at that point because I just kept thinking, what was that in the woods? One night though, it was late at night and I was thinking about everything and I just thought, oh, Annette, you're just crazy. These things don't exist. You need to get your life back in order. You need to kind of get back into, helping people. And not that I wasn't helping people, but, get serious. Quit thinking about this. Quit watching these shows. Quit thinking that this stuff exists. And, get your act together. There's never been anything like this and it doesn't exist. And so I went to bed. And the next day I had the day off and I was playing a video game and I had half my headphones on. So I was listening to the video game, but I had an ear out for if somebody knocked on the door or whatever. And I heard this loud kaboom on top of my house, like something landed or fell on my house. And then I heard boom, boom, and it ran off my house. My dogs went berserk. Uh, the dogs going all the way down to the street to the huge open fields went berserk. Every house went berserk of the animals. So I know it wasn't just me that heard that. And so I ran into the front yard. I threw my headphones off, ran through my house, ran to the front yard. And when I got to the front yard, I kind of heard in my own head, just sort of my own voice, a soft voice say, "Come to the field, you'll see us." And I was like, I don't care about that. I'm worried about my roof of my house. At the time, I had foundation issues with my house, and I hadn't had that repaired yet. And so now I'm thinking I've got a broken roof because the way it hit was so hard. So I ran back in the house, ran to my, out the sliding glass door, looked up at my roof, and there's no sign of anything being up on my roof. There's no footprints. There's no cracked roof. I would have thought for as hard as it had landed that my beam of my house would have been caved in. It was that hard of how it landed, almost like it got dropped from some, I don't know, flying saucer or plane, or like someone had jumped out of a plane or something. Anyways, so, but yeah, I never went back out to the field or pursued it at all. But all the dogs reacted, in the neighborhood. Um, so that was it was kind of like, we are here. Don't doubt us. But so um so after that, what had happened was so it was 2019 and a friend of mine, a person that I knew it from a friend of a friend. Apparently they had a Sasquatch, they had a sighting. And I was so jealous. They had moved up here from California, and I was mad because I'm like, I'm from Oregon. I'm the one that should have a sighting, not them. So I have to admit, I was really pretty jealous. And I was thinking about it, and I went through all kinds of emotions over the issue because I thought, darn it, I should have spent more time out this summer in the woods. Maybe I would have seen one. I should have done that. I should have done this. So, I had a job in Eugene, and so I was commuting back and forth, and I would always kind of take the scenic route through the woods. And every time I kind of got towards the woods, I kind of had a voice that came into my head. I figured it was just myself talking to myself, but it's like, hey, Annette, if you could see a Bigfoot, what kind of sighting do you want to see? You know? And I'm like, geez, I don't know, and I thought about it over 3 days. I thought, and this was as I was driving, I would always think about this. I'd be like, what kind of sighting would I want? Maybe way out in the woods, I could see one far away. And I thought, no, I want to see one up close, and I thought, well, I don't want to see a big male Sasquatch up close. That would be super, super scary, right? And then I'm thinking, well, maybe a juvenile male. And I thought, yeah, I could see a juvenile male maybe up close. And I thought, no, I think I'd be kind of scared about that too, you know. And then I thought, you know what? I finally, it was like day 3 of thinking about this while I was driving, and I thought, I want to see a female up close because, all the stories you read, you have less of a bad encounter if you see a female, right? And so I finally said, well, okay, I want to see a female, and I'm just fantasizing in my head as far as I knew. So the very next night, it's about 8:20 at night, and this is 2009, and it's November 8th. And I marked the date, and it was about 8:20 at night. My husband's in on his computer, and he's got his headphones on, and all my dogs are laying there asleep. And I look over at the sliding glass door, and I see a black, hairy foot coming through the glass and the curtain. And I see its foot, I see its knee, and then I see it kind of come right up into a stand-up position. And it's a female Sasquatch, and she took one step, and she was kind of hunched over a little bit, and she kind of like tossed her shoulders and stood up real straight. And let me tell you, this female, she was so fierce looking. It was unreal, but just incredibly beautiful. And she looked at me, and she had the most scariest looking eyes, though. So I thought, well, okay, this is weird. I can't explain the sliding glass door thing. That doesn't make any sense to me, but here she is. And so she looked at me, and she just stood there. And so I looked at her. She had kind of a conical head. She had black hair. She had black skin. So she was all black. And her hair, was on her head anyways, was probably about 6 to 8 inches long. And it was different lengths at different parts of her body. So there was definitely shorter hair and longer hair. But so I kind of looked at the top of her hair, and her hair was kind of parted down sort of the center of her hair. And she had bangs coming down on her forehead. And they were kind of thin and dispersed, so I could see her forehead pretty well through her bangs. Her hair was really, really straight, very shiny, and the hair tapered off at the very ends, kind of like an animal's hair would taper off. Um, and she had an eyebrow ridge that was really large, went from kind of where the nose bridge would be clear to where the side of the head would be. So much wider eyebrow than ours. But her face was narrow like a human's face, but just the eyebrow feature went over much further and more straight than ours. And she she had luminized blue eyes, like they were lit up and they were all blue, but I tried not to really look at her in the eye because I wanted to kind of get a good look at her from top to bottom, and I guess I was worried that she would probably talk to me if I looked at her in the eyes. And she looked angry. She absolutely looked angry and not happy about being there, and I didn't understand that either. But anyways, so I went ahead and continued looking at her. She had a little bit of hair on her cheeks. Her nose was just a lot like how our nose would be. I mean, it wasn't broad, it wasn't flat like a lot of people describe. Um, so yeah, but her nose was just kind of like how a woman's nose would be. Her shoulders were not very broad at all. They were wide, kind of like, just like how mine would be. Her body was absolutely athletic. I mean, she looked like a tennis player, really lean, absolutely no fat on her at all. Her hair also, she didn't have any hair on her face, but the hair started again just underneath the chin, and it was super short hair, short black hair. And then it also stopped again once it went down her to where the neck ended and her shoulder blades would be. Um, And so that then the hair ended there. The hair started again on kind of on the outer side of her ribs. That's where the hair started again. And it tapered from being really short hair into longer hair. Kind of almost like you would see with a dog on its face, where the hair could be shorter, then tapers out longer on, say, like on a, I don't know, a schnauzer or something, So it just almost like it was meant, the hair flowed perfectly like how it would on an animal. Um, and her arms were long. They were kind of hanging down. I couldn't really see her knees because she had so much hair on the lower part of her body, and she was standing up absolutely straight. Um, but her hands were black, and what was really weird about the hands is that her fingers were longer than our fingers, but the same proportions are as our fingers as far as length proportion, except for that the fingers were actually longer, and the tips of the fingers tapered a lot more than our fingers are a little more flat as we come to the end of our finger. But hers tapered, and then her nails were rounded and black and really thick. Also, another thing is her thumb set back further than ours. So if you look up like a chimpanzee's thumb, which I've done before or since this, it looked very much the same shape as like a chimpanzee's hand would be, with an opposable thumb. Her skin was thick and kind of more leathery. And also on the back part of the arms, she was so thick in hair you couldn't see through. The only part that you could see through was where her skin was bare. Um, so yeah, then when you look down to her feet were probably about 15 inches long, and the hair stopped just like maybe a half inch short of like the bottom of her foot. Um, and then the hair also covered up probably to the bridge of her foot. So just before the toes started, you could kind of re-see where the toes were. Um, so after looking her over, I looked back up at her, and when I made eye contact with her, um, in my head, loud and clear, was, "You see us now." And I just was like, whoa, because, and so I just bowed my head, and I said, in my mind, I said, "Thank you. You're beautiful." And then when I kind of looked back up, she wasn't even in my living room anymore. She was just gone. The whole feeling, the whole air about her, and her, kind of uppity. She seemed very uppity and kind of angry. All of that was gone. And my dogs are sitting there asleep. Everything's normal, like it had never happened. And so that was just an amazing thing to have happen. And a gift, I felt, even though she was angry, and it almost seemed to me like she was kind of being forced to, you know, do this. Um, I don't know though. So then after that, I had this, I had this, well, it was like a reel or like a video being put into my head. So this would have been like probably, I don't know, maybe 9 months afterwards. So I get up in the morning, and it's like 9 a.m. in the morning, and I'm out. Suddenly, I'm sitting on my chair, and suddenly I'm out at Cottage Grove Lake, but it's at the crack of dawn. And I'm like, what? And so I'm standing there overlooking the lake, and I turn around and I look back behind me, and I see some green eyes coming out of the trees. And it's almost like the shadows of the trees just pulled out of the trees. And it's this black Sasquatch walking towards me with green eyes. And instantly my heart's just pounding. And he walks right up to me, and he walks just past me, but he never puts his eyes on me. And he turns around, and he he stops, and he looks over at at the sun that's rising. And it's really weird. What happened was this sort of membrane mucus, well, like a membrane, like an eye membrane, comes out, but it comes out vertically off the side of his eyes. And it comes out about maybe 2/3 of the way. And it's kind of got, it's white and it's got some gray squiggles in it. And I can see the gray squiggles and I could still see the color of his eyes as I'm kind of looking up at him because he's right next to me. And his eyes go from green to gold, and then that membrane retracts back, and he's gold-eyed looking at the sun, and he's all black. And then instantly, I'm back in my chair again. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird because, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's not crack of dawn. That whole thing was just something that was put into my head. And so that I was like, wow, this is really amazing. And he was just beautiful. He looked like some kind of a titan. I mean, he looked very, very human. And he was also all black, black skin, black hair. And so that was kind of cool. And then so I'm trying to think here. So after all that, so about a year and I was really confused by how that Sasquatch came into my house. And so about a year and 2 months later, I ended up having this sort of lucid dream where I was walking out into the forest and our local forest, and it's a moonlit night, and I'm walking through the trees in the dream, and I come to this sort of circular opening in the trees, and I'm like, oh. So I stop and I look around into the woods around me, and the moonlight's kind of pitched down into this circle. And I see this darker area in the trees, and all of a sudden, the Sasquatch that was in my house, that female, was right there in my dream. And I said, hey, how you doing? And she's like, oh, fine. We're kind of talking in the dream. And I'm like, how did you come into my house? How did you do that? And I was kind of asking her in my dream. And she's like, oh, well, when I came to your house, because one thing I noticed in the dream is that she seemed much taller, same proportions as what I saw in my house, except for in the dream, she was bigger. And she said, oh, she goes, I was astral projecting myself so I could fit into your house. And I was like, oh, okay. But so that was kind of weird. Then, and it was just a dream, of course, but, I don't know. Maybe I was having an out of body in my dream state. I don't know. Anyways, so the next thing that kind of happened was, so it was 2020, we're on lockdown, and I'm pretty depressed at this point. I'm like, the whole world is coming to an end here. And, I'm thinking, geez, what's going to happen next? Are grocery supplies going to go down? Are we going to not be able to get food anymore? And I'm just really worried about that. And all of a sudden, and I'm thinking about to myself, well, if that happens, how do I get food? I don't know how to hunt. And I'm like, I'm going to have to carve a bow and arrow and go out and try to kill something to eat it, And I was thinking that, and in my head, that soft voice comes to my head and it says, with a real loving feel, it says to me, we will never let you starve. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's nice. And, whatever this is, it's nice that they say that. So I don't know if it was the next day or the day after that. I can't quite remember. But I went out to the lake. And when I went out there, I was standing down by the water. And there was sort of this boggy area that earlier in the spring I had noticed. Just a little small, like, maybe a 3-foot area where it was kind of swampy, And I had noticed that, and I remember thinking back in the spring, I remember thinking this would be a great place to see a Sasquatch track, right? And so but I'm down at the water, and something kind of comes into my head and says, you need to go check out that boggy area. You might see a track. And I'm like, huh? Okay. So I turn around and I walk up to that boggy area. And sure enough, there's a track there, a really defined large track, right? And so I took some pictures of it, put my sandal next to it. The track looks like it was maybe done in the spring, because the ground is hard now. So this track's been there a while. You can see little plants starting to grow up into the track. So, it's clearly, going to go away pretty soon, but it's still really well defined. And so I, I'm like, well, my intention was to go walk over the dam, and I was just kind of trying to get some extra steps in. So that's kind of why I was in that area, was just to get a little extra steps. And anyway, so I thought, well, I better go ahead and walk back up to the bike path. So I did walk up to the bike path. And when I did, um, there was all this grass between the bike path and London Road, which is just up above, maybe 6 feet above the path. Um, but in the long grass, it was all compressed down. And I just froze, because I've been up to Glacier National Park in the past, and where the grizzly bears lay down at night alongside the path, there was always these huge flattened marks. So I knew some kind of animal had laid down there, but we don't have grizzly bear. And the biggest thing I think we do have is an elk, and that's the only thing. A cougar is not that big either, or our black bears are pretty small. So I'm like, what is this? And instantly I'm on high alert. So I just freeze, and suddenly it feels like all eyes are on me. And I look up onto the road, which I can see, and there is what looks like a dog or a coyote. It kind of had a natural look, like it might have been a coyote or a wolf or something, but I only see the body. The head has been severed off. There's no blood dripping down, but it looks like it was very instantly had been done, right there, like within minutes. And I just froze when I saw that. It scared the heck out of me. I mean, and I just froze up, and I started looking around me to make sure that nothing was coming at me, because I felt like heavily, heavily watched. Honestly, I felt watched from maybe, like, I don't know, like 100 feet away, like something was there, but it wasn't right there. And I look at one of the trees, and these are scraggly, thin trees, right? I look at one of the trees, and I look over at another, and I hear a woodpecker, but I don't see a woodpecker. So I'm assuming this woodpecker or sapsucker or whatever that's pecking on the tree, um, it must be on a side of the tree that I can't see. But instantly I'm like, okay, what I come here for? To walk over the dam. So I walked off, and I left it, and I walked on. And when I got home, um, I got this real heavy, sad feel and disappointment feel inside of me. And I'm like, and I thought, something left that. I think they left it for me. When I saw it, I thought something had maybe just been feeding, and I interrupted it, and I didn't know what it was. And so instantly I thought I should get out of there. But then, so when I got that heavy feeling, like something was sad and disappointed and angry, definitely a male masculine feel is what it was. Um, I just said to it, I'm sorry. I know I was thinking that the other day. I was just worried about something. It's not something that's actually happened. I don't need food, but thank you for the gift. And when I need it. Now, the weird thing about this, I said, when I need it, maybe I'll take it, and utilize the fur. And, I mean, I'm not one to be above, trying to live if I have to, anyways, but what was really strange about that was, Parks and Recreation and lake management, they always pick up, dead kill, and, the sheriffs and the, police, they'll pick up roadkill and throw it in the back of their car. Nothing touched this, uh, whatever this dog coyote, was. Nothing touched the carcass. Bugs wouldn't even touch the carcass. That thing took 6 months to degrade in the sun on the side of the road. Nobody touched it, no animal touched it, and I just watched it for the rest of the summer just disintegrate away until it was just a skin sitting there. But it disintegrated away. It didn't get eaten. Nothing touched it. So that was just the weirdest and the creepiest thing. Um, from there, one other thing that had happened too was it was a couple years ago. Well, probably like 3 years ago. I went out for a walk. I like to walk my neighborhood, stay in shape and stay healthy. And I walked down, there's my house, and then it goes down about 6 houses, and then it goes into open fields up into the woods. And these open fields are really vast, they're big. And I'm walking down the street, and I see this big cut off tall redwood tree right out in the field. And I'm like, what? We don't have a redwood tree here. There's nothing here. I walk this field every day. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I turn around, I walk off, and I walk up to the next street, and I walk down that street, which goes to the open field, and I look over, and it's not there anymore. So that happened. And then the very last thing that has happened to me, or at least the most recent, was probably about a couple of years ago. My friend and I were driving up by Wildwood Falls. And we were coming back, and the road's kind of winding and twisting. And so we're going slow. She's driving, and I'm in her car with her. And I turn around, and I'm like, stop, there's a fox. And my friend threw on her brakes. And what I saw on the passenger side was a wish of air. And I thought, what is that? So I instantly kind of relaxed, and I thought, huh. And so I told her, I'm like, oh, I said, I must have been mistaken. And she's like, oh, no worries, and so we continued driving on. And so when I got home, I thought, that is so weird. And so um, I just went ahead, and I kind of got myself into a relaxed state and kept watching it and repeating it, kind of like when I got hypnotized. And finally, I kind of see that air movement again. I see it over and over again. And finally, the hole kind of develops in the air, movement. And off the ground, about 12 feet, I see a little baby shoulder with long red, kind of mahogany, red, like a red fox, hair. And so that was kind of, I was, surprised to see that. So, after I'd had that Sasquatch walk into my house, it was another year or two, I don't know, it was 2021 or 2022. No, I think it was 2022. I saw on Facebook that Doug Meacham had made a post, and he's a hypnotherapist and a friend of Ron Moorhead's. And he had made a post, hey, if you think you've had a Sasquatch encounter or an alien encounter, please get a hold of me. I'd love to do a regression and help you, remember exactly what happened. And he also, I think, helped out Todd Neese, and he's also helped out Bob Gimlin. I guess he hypnotized Bob Gimlin on the Patty, film. And so what I would give to actually see that, I guess he did it at a show, and I would love to see, or at least hear, what that was like for Bob Gimlin. That'd be cool. But anyways, he helped Todd Neese out too with his experience. And so I went ahead and got a hold of him and, went through hypnosis. So, he had my whole body relax, and I was in his office, and he had my whole body kind of get into a deep, deep relaxation. And then he walked me back up to that two-story fort again from when I was a kid. And I'm looking up, and of course I'm in a hypnotic state, and I'm like, those are Sasquatches. And there was 4 Sasquatches. So they were juveniles. There was the one right up above me was a taller male. So I would guess he was somewhere between probably 4.5 feet and 5 feet tall. And then there was next to him a girl Sasquatch who was shorter, and another girl that was a little bit shorter, and then a little bit taller boy, but not as tall as the first one. And the boys were really obvious because I was directly underneath them. The boys' shoulders had a lot of muscle, like they were really developed. And the girls, their shoulders were very slight. I've seen enough pictures now that I know what a Sasquatch looks like. These aren't aliens, because I had always thought it was maybe an alien because of the missing time. And, so, and the amnesia, which I didn't know what that was about. But I think I have a better understanding now for that. But anyways, but yeah, they're scared. Their mouths are in the shape of an O. They had, if you get a baseball mitt and you've had it for a couple weeks, their skin was about that color. Um, and they had, they kind of looked mahogany, reddish mahogany kind of colored, but with a lot of, kind of golden too to them. And they all kind of had similar hair and similar color. Their eyes were like, the pupils of their eyes were really wide, and then the iris was really thin around it, and the iris was really light blue. And then there was the white of their eyes. But they looked at me very fearful. And then what ended up coming out in hypnosis, and it took some time for this to come out, but the taller one above me jumped down in front of me. And he grabbed me by the shoulders. But when he grabbed me by the shoulders, he had his palms and his fingers straight. He just kind of braced me with his hands on either side of my shoulder. And he kind of squatted down in front of me, and he put his face to my face, and I looked down at his arm hair, and I could see the arm hair going from really mahogany kind of in color, and it faded out into the hair just hanging there, faded out into a golden retriever gold color. And he looked at me and he screamed. He opened his mouth wide and he screamed at me. And it was a loud, shrill female sounding scream. And then he let go of my shoulders, and I just staggered backwards because of that sound, and it just ricocheted through my body. I can't explain it, but it was such shock I couldn't do anything. And he let me go, and I staggered backwards, and I fell flat on my butt. And then he grabbed the post of the fort, and he took his other hand and he punched the ground at me, like, to stay away from them. It was kind of what I got from that, is that he didn't want me to ever get too close like that. And he turned around and he pulled himself with one arm all the way up to the top level of that fort, like a monkey would do. So that was just really weird. But then I heard this rushing sound, just bulldozer sound, through that greenway swath on the other side of the railroad tracks, which ended in kind of a big blackberry mound, right? And this male Sasquatch on all fours comes just bulldozing through that blackberry bush. And he ends up putting on the brakes right over the railroad tracks, and the rocks underneath his fingers just flew up into the air. And he just growled at me. And he looked over after he growled at me, he looked over at the children, and the children grabbed there was a couple scraggly trees right there by the ford. They grabbed a hold of the scraggly trees and got down and went behind him and went back in the hole that he had come out of. And they were kind of like on all threes as they were kind of moving off, on the ground. They kind of did it on all threes. It kind of had the other hand was kind of up in the air looking at me like they were scared. And then he looked, after they got all the way in, he made sure they got all the way in. And then he turned around and he looked at me, and he kind of looked off to the side and just went, oh. kind of huffing, like, you stupid human child, you got too close to us. Like he was frustrated, like, ugh, you're not worth it, you're not worth my time. And he turned around and he, on all fours, and he turned around and he walked back in the way he came from the blackberries, the way the kids went. And I just sat there, and Doug, when he was there, so when I got to experience that adult coming out, I started coming out of hypnosis, or being really relaxed. And Doug's like, "Hey, step outside your body and watch what happens. That way you don't have to experience it so close." And so I did, and then I was able to stay nice and relaxed and kind of finish up the experience. Um, and anyway, so I sat there for a while, and finally I got the wherewithal and started standing up again. And I stood up and I started walking back to my house, and I stop, and sure enough, that horrible rushing feeling comes. The world feels really big around me. There's a strange feeling. I go into my house. I don't recognize my parents. When we go to pick up my brother and sister, I don't recognize them. My memories all come back to me, but the amnesia, I think, was just due to severe shock. Um, so so yeah, that's been my experiences.
Annette, that is a fascinating account. My goodness, because wow, yeah, so listeners, I didn't know a lot about this going into it, and it's so fascinating. I do have a few questions, if that's all right.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So regarding the Sasquatch that came into your home, which is very interesting. At that time, did you have any home security system in your home at all?
No, and the whole time my phone was right next to me on my table, and I mean, like, when you meet someone for the first time, and I gotta say this, how rude would it be to pick up your phone and take a picture of them?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And it felt the same way. It felt like someone was introducing themselves to me. She didn't seem happy about it, but she was introducing herself to me. There was no way I was going to pick up my phone, and no way I even thought about it. No home security other than my dogs.
And you hear that, so many times. I haven't been able to experience myself yet, but you do hear that a lot, is that, even if the person did have a phone with them, it's just the magnitude of what's happening is so great that they don't even, think of it. So it totally makes sense. Have you seen the Patterson Gimlin film before?
Oh yeah, I the first time, so my parents had given me a book that had like the Loch Ness monster and had a still picture of Patty, just a photo of her. But I was 12 by the time I saw her, so I was a little bit older, definitely older than when the Patterson film had been filmed. But when I saw her, I remember thinking, "Oh my God, they live in our woods." But beyond thinking that, because I thought, well, if it's in Northern California, it's going to be in Oregon, because our woods are even thicker than down there, you know, and impenetrable, But then, like I said, I grew up fishing, doing all that stuff, and, being out and playing by creeks, and never once ever saw anything. So, it was pretty much quickly out of my mind again.
Did what you saw in your house that day, did it remind you of Patty at all, or was it such a completely different figure?
I would say completely different. Patty's built like a large refrigerator, so she was clearly built more like a human, but taller. But she was built just like a human, other than her breasts seemed different, and her hands seemed different, and her feet seemed different, and of course her face was very different. Her face was scary because, her mouth went from cheek to cheek, and she had really thin lips, and thank God her lips were shut, because that I would have I don't know if I could have handled seeing teeth, you know. But she also, her eyes were like from the bridge of her nose all the way to the edge of the side of her head. So her eyes were super long. And her pupils of her eyes were vertical like a cat, which gave her very much a predator look. And then just that glowing blue where everything, it was like like how you'd see the blue on an electronics,
Hmm.
like a stereo or microwave or something. Um, it was that color of blue, and they were self-illuminized.
Which is extremely interesting. If you think of other reports, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some new information as well. After you had that encounter, have you ever seen anything that is close to what you saw that day in your house, like any representations or anything like that?
In the book, in David Pilates' book, the Hoopa village,
Mm,
there was an Indian girl who David said, he didn't, Harvey Pratt, I guess, drew a picture of this Sasquatch, and it's in that book, and he, I think it's in the Tribal Bigfoot book, I think.
okay.
Anyways, but it's like three-quarters of the way through the book. But it's this Indian girl, Ingrid something, her name, and I'm probably saying it wrong. She had an encounter where she saw a Sasquatch with vertical eyes as well. And David said he wouldn't have put it in the book, but he said she was so convincing to him, anyways, that he said he felt it was worth going ahead and putting her account and Harvey Pratt's picture in there. And when I saw that and I flipped to that when I was reading that book, my heart stopped. It just stopped because those were the same eyes. The face is wider than the one I saw.
Hmm.
The one I saw had more of a narrower face, but the eyes were the same eyes. And it made my heart stop.
Wow, it took
Yeah,
you right back. That's really very
it
interesting.
did. Yeah. Yeah, that did. I thought I'm not the only one.
There's we've talked about Cottage Grove, but also areas past Dorena Lake. Um, there's another area down there that comes up every once in a while in emails and stuff, and I'm just curious if you had you heard anything, or if you've been down there. If you are you familiar with the Sharps Creek area at all?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I had a strange experience there too. I remember, well, I went up there and I crossed over the first bridge there, and I just parked my car and kind of walked through the gate. And I started walking down this gravel road that's towards, the woods there. And there's a bunch of blackberry mounds too, which you have to be careful around here because cougars like to get into blackberry mounds.
Mm.
Um, so you got to be kind of careful because they tend to hide out there, you know. And so I saw all these blackberry mounds, but I started getting this horrible negative feeling. And I just thought, nope, I'm not going that way. It was an oppressive, negative feeling. And so I thought, well, okay, so I'm going to walk back on the other side of Sharps Creek, just kind of through these open fields, because I wanted to look at Sharps Creek not from the road, but from the other side of the creek. And so I started walking that way. Well, I took a picture of the woods where I was getting that feeling from. And I went home and I changed the filter, one filter, and it's basically, like a blob squatch, picture.
Right.
But there is something there with eyes that you can see kind of glowing. Um, so I don't know. It's a vague picture, and it could be a bear, it could be anything. It could just be a trick of the lights, as far as I'm concerned. But I mean, that was my experience. And so I took my brother and my sister-in-law there, and I'm like, man, there's something negative here. And so I took them there, and we walked up there. And my brother, he's ex-military, and he's not afraid of anything, And he's like, man, I can feel it too, this is bad. Whatever that is bad. And I'm like, yeah. And then it was weird because my friend, they're from Alaska. I took her. She was the one I was up at Wildwood with. I took her up there, and the gate was open over the road, and so we went up there, and I walked over, and I told her, "Yeah, this is where I had that bad feeling of something." But that particular day, there was no bad feeling at all, and it was like, okay, whatever it is gone. And then some guys come up on the road with a truck full of wood, and that's why the gate was open. And so we had to move our car, and I didn't walk back there anyway, because after that one time, there's no way I was going to walk back into those trees. I won't risk it.
It's a
Yeah.
very interesting area. I get a lot of emails about encounters by Sharps Creek, and I've even talked to at least one landowner in that area, and there's definite activity in that area. If listeners have also experienced anything, feel free to reach out. But I have just two more questions for you, Annette, and I'm really thankful for all the time that you're able to spend with us today. Going back to the Blair campground part of your account, do you remember the next morning getting up? Did you happen to see any footprints or anything around the tent or anything that would show that there were pacing?
Oh, you know what? I wish that I would have known what I knew now about that. I totally would have explored or even looked up on that incline to see if I see anything. But no, I wanted out of there. And I wanted to pack up my tent. I didn't even look around. We didn't have breakfast. We didn't do anything. We just got out of there. Yeah.
Makes total sense. Yeah.
And my husband, I never told my husband about it because he was a Christian. My first husband was. Now, my current husband, he'd be like, yeah, we could talk about it, because we're totally open. But
right.
In that marriage, things were different. We were real estate investors, and we were just like, no, our heads weren't in the game on that one.
Totally get it. Last one is just a curveball, just for fun. Sure. I ask people that are familiar with this area, and you mentioned Oakridge and Odell Lake and all that. So have you ever heard anything about there's a lake called Spirit Lake. Have you ever heard anything weird happening there, or have you been there?
No, I've never been there. And I've heard you mention it on your shows because I listen. But no, I'm not even sure where that's located. There is a lake that's up off the McKenzie that has been known to be a place where you see balls of light. And I read in this book about it being a place where people have Bigfoot encounters. And I remember this was when I was in my 20s, and I was at that time I was really doing a lot of athletic stuff, so I was really in shape. And my boyfriend at that time, he was a national badminton player, and we went for a hike up there at that lake. And I went in knowing that this lake had this reputation. And I don't want to mention it just because I think it's probably important to the Bigfoot people, for them. But anyways, we started hiking, and it was really kind of a decline, at least the first part of the trail, going down to the lake. However, I felt like my legs weighed 1,000 pounds. I felt so fatigued. And it was unusual. And I'm like, man, maybe I'm getting sick. And I asked my boyfriend, he's like, yeah, I just feel the same way. We were going to hike past the lake and, go up into the woods. And we had this whole planned thing out. And we just ended up turning around and walking back out. And we were so terribly fatigued. But no, the Spirit Lake, no. Now I want to go after I've heard what you said.
Yeah, definitely look out for Sasquatch with dreadlocks, because that's where they are. Per one of the accounts.
It'd be cool to see one.
Yeah,
it'd be cool to see one with dreadlocks too.
Yeah, that's true actually. Yeah,
the ones I've seen always had smooth hair. They didn't have dreadlocks at all.
It's very, very interesting I think I've gotten that two different times. Something where someone mentions something that looks like dreadlocks, but Annette, it has been just a fascinating conversation. Thank you
Sure.
for sharing the
Thanks
different
for having
parts
me.
of your experiences over the years. If anything else does happen, feel free to reach out. But it's just been a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you.
Awesome. You have a wonderful day.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKinsey Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oakridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.